All right, so there have been some undocumented, fairly massive changes to the warrior hero talents, and I want to go over them pretty quickly. I want to say first and foremost, thank you to a Mr. Zantaga. He is the one who sent me this webpage here that showed the differences between the new tooltips that have been updated for warrior, as well as I now have the old PNGs from the original releases. So I just want to go over what was changed fairly quickly and how sizable some of these increases. Some of these have been buffed literally by double. So let's go over them pretty quickly. Colossus and Slayer received most of the changes. There are some changes in Mountain Thane, but Mountain Thane remains relatively the same. So starting with Colossus, we are going to see that the initial tooltip is already completely different. We have this small tooltip here, but this one they added something new. While channeling Demolish, you take 10% less damage, and you're immune to stuns, knockbacks, and force movement effects. This original effect was taken from the Unstoppable Force augment here of the capstone, but now it is here, and you take 10% less damage. The additional changes to this as well are that these lines are the same, but when we go to this line here, Tides of Battle is now 5% per stack instead of 2. So this received a 150% buff. For this one, they also adjusted the tooltip here. Taking damage as a chance to give you second wind for 2 seconds. It is now a chance instead of a low chance, meaning that the ability for this to actually start activating seems far more significant than before, making it way better. Practice strikes was 15%, now it is 20%. They also changed Mountain of Muscle and Scars. It was 5%, 2.5%, 5%, but it is now 5%, 5%, and 5%. So you have a base 5% damage reduction just by being a Colossus. You then have another 10% while channeling Demolish. And they added something to the capstone, which makes this even more significant. Enemies affected by Demolish take up to 10% more damage from you and deal up to 10% less damage to you for 10 seconds based on the number of stacks of Colossal Might consumed by Demolish. So I'm assuming it is 1% per stack of Colossal Might, since Colossal Might still stacks to 10 seconds. The tooltip is still the same here. Cooldown Demolish is reduced by 2 seconds if you would have gained a stack but already have enough. But the change to make them deal 10% more damage and take 10% less damage. You take 10% less damage. The enemy takes 10% more damage after Demolish is used. Does a couple things for me. The first thing this does is it offsets the fact that you are losing potentially stacks of Arterial Bleed and Tides of Battle. Because as you gain stacks of Colossal Might, it increases the damage of these two. So it offsets the actual loss of the Colossal Might stack, as well as letting you get back to a fairly sizable damage number with the Tides of Battle stacks pretty quickly. But this is just a fairly massive change. Increases the overall amount of damage you do, reduces the overall amount of damage you take, and depending on how things work out, you're basically at 10 stacks and then 10 seconds after spending, taking a base and negative 15% damage between Mountain of Muscle and Scars, and just the Demolish active and the Unstoppable Force damage reduction as well, which is a massive survivability increase for arms specifically, and it really needed it. So that is actually very sizable changes for Colossus itself. When we go over to Mountain Thane, they did change a couple things. Excuse me. One of the bigger ones was this one here. The Call to Thunder talent, Seismic Reverberation and Barbaric Training now also improve Thunderclap as well as Whirlwind. Originally, it was just Whirlwind and Meat Cleaver. If we go into the talent calculator for Warrior, you'll see that Seismic Reverberation and Barbaric Training are these two. So now these will affect Thunderclap as well. This Barbaric Training mainly is a significant damage increase, but the fact that Thunderblast damage will ignore armor, it does 50% more damage, it's going to be doing more damage with Barbaric Training and more critical damage, and it has a chance to hit again for 30% additional damage on a pack of mobs. It is also, I think, Thunderclap is one of the spells that does a reduced amount of damage based on the amount of enemies it hits, so it is also an uncapped amount of AoE. So it is pretty good. It is a pretty sizable increase to the AoE specifically. When we go further into the Mountain Thane mock-up, they change. This is still the same. Ground current is still the same. Let's see here. This is still the same tooltips on all of these. They did change Valajar training. It was originally 0.5 seconds, reducing the cooldown of Ravager, but now it's 1 second for lightning strikes, which is a 100% buff. It is just straight up double. These talents are still the same. Gathering Clouds and Thorm's Might are still the same. This one is still the same. One thing I do want to note is that there is a lot of talents in here, like this one here, that either reduces the cooldown or resets the cooldown of Bloodthirst. This has a chance to give you your next 2 Bloodthirsts have no cooldown. With the amount of focus that they've been giving Bloodthirst and these hero talents specifically, I think that's grounds to believe that Bloodthirst is going to be, at least for Fury, a far more significant button for us to press. Bloodthirst was our primo button and had been our primo button since the beginning of time of Fury Warrior, right? It was the best button we had. It was used since Classic WoW as one of our best buttons. So I think returning to form a little bit and making Bloodthirst a way better button just to hit. You want to hit that button instead of it being a filler that it's a primary ability is going to be very good. And I think that's better. And the tooltip for here remains the same. Like I said, Mountain Thane didn't receive very many changes. They seem to be pretty happy with it outside of buffing its AoE a little bit. I do wonder if buffing its AoE over and over like this could lead it to being decent in Mythic Plus for Fury. But as far as playstyle is concerned, I think I prefer the other talents, as well as, even for Mythic Plus specifically, Earthquaker, which has Shockwave, knocks enemies up into the air, and its cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds, is insane. Because there's not many knockups in the game. Knockups are not DRable, so you can just fucking send this fucking thing. You can just send it. Even if the stun is DR'd, you should still be able to knock up the enemy. Hopefully it's not a situation where they have to be able to be stunned to be knock-upped. But knockups are very powerful in this game. So I think Colossus receiving all of these buffs, plus having something as good as Earthquaker, is going to be very interesting to look forward to. There is also the potential for the alpha coming out this Wednesday. There's a lot of people talking about it, not streaming till then. There's people in London for an event. Like Bellular and TNE, stuff like that. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully, if the alpha is soon, I get into it. I would like to be in it. But that is Mountain Thane. Now let's move over to Slayer, which actually received another significant amount of changes. So the main tooltip here is the same. It is the same for these, but they did change this. One of the main concerns I had was this passive here within the original show and discussion, because it lasted for 10 seconds, it increased damage by 1%, but it had no max cap. And I was worried that this Slayer spec would end up playing around Overwhelming Blades more so than just playing the class itself. Because if it could stack infinitely, if you got a crazy amount of RNG, you could realistically just let this thing build and build and build and build and build, and it was feast or famine whether or not you would actually do a lot of damage, and you would play specifically around this Overwhelming Blades debuff because it would continually to stack damage. However, it does not seem like it. Well, that is not the case anymore. It increased its duration to 20 seconds compared to 10, and it is now max 10 stacks. So that's very good. Removes that potential degenerate playstyle as well as buff the duration. Realistically, what this is probably going to be is kept at max stacks if you're able to keep high uptime. This is good for single targets, good for AoE. These talents here remain the same. I kind of with Death Drive, instead of being heal for 50%, gave you a shield like Condemned did in Shadowlands. I feel like it would be more versatile and more useful, but in terms of thematics, the heal is probably more what they want to go for, and giving Slayer additional defenses on top of what it already has as a tanky class is probably not something they necessarily want to do, because you can add a defensive layer with overshielding. So that's probably why it remains that way. And like I said, this talent pool here, they did change the wording, because this was previously Slayer strikes have a chance, and now it does have a 50% chance. The constant pressure is the same thing, but it is once again resetting the cooldown of Bloodthirst, reducing the cooldown of Bloodthirst. So I think these are fairly significant. To say Bloodthirst is going to be better. They did add a tooltip effect for Tunnel Vision and for the kill. Tunnel Vision is now you gain 2% attack speed every 3 seconds while in combat up to a max of 20%. Changing targets resets its effect. And Thrill of the Kill is every time execute increases your auto attack speed by 30% for 10 seconds. Something that is interesting is that this execute is not just the imminent demise bonus damage execute that gives you the sudden death accelerates your next blade storm effect. Sorry, excuse me. But instead, it is just any execute. So I find this very interesting that when you're going to be in execute as a warrior, if they retain the 35% massacre talent, uh, depending on how procs work and how many sudden deaths you get during the fight, Thrill the Kill you could just be using forever on everything potentially, depending on the proc rate. I see Tunnel Vision as being pretty decent for pure single target, but even then, let's say you're fighting a single target boss that has an execute phase, you might just take Thrill of the Kill even though it's single target because you want that bonus execute damage in terms of killing it in progression, right? So it is very interesting to see. We'll see how good it is. I am honestly, I'll probably be running Thrill of the Kill 90% of the time because having your attack speed reset, your rage regeneration lowered, just because you swapped a target. I really don't like target swapping being a detriment to your class. I'd rather just Tunnel Vision increase your auto attack speed while you're in combat, and then losing combat slowly reduces your attack speed, and then getting into combat lets you stack it up again, compared to just changing targets. The whole changing target thing sucks. I mean, I know it's called Tunnel Vision, but they could easily change the name of it to like combat focus or enraged focus, something, right? The idea of losing a bunch of bonus damage and resource generation because you needed to swap targets just sucks. It's the same reason Frenzy sucks in the Fury tree, because you don't like it's not nearly as impactful, but losing 8% haste is still losing 8% haste if you have to change a target. It sucks. Slay is also buffed by 100%. It is now damage and crit damage on execute by 10% per stack of the marked for execution. It was previously 5. So this bonus was straight up doubled. They gave a percentage damage number for Frenetic Flurry. One thing I don't know that I think could be interesting, or probably should work, is the bonus attacks you get while blade storming through the Imminent Demise talent. Using Sudden Death accelerates your next blade storm, striking 1 additional time, max 3. Realistically, I don't think we're going to be reducing the blade storm cooldown to the point where we're not going to we're going to be able to use it every time, or we'll use stacks. So what I'm assuming is this talent is going to feed into the Frenetic Flurry, where as you're gaining stacks of this and you're activating it through the use of Overpower and Bloodthirst, you will be consuming and striking a few additional times with this. One thing that I think is interesting is that they said what they wanted this to be is it shouldn't harm your global cooldown. So these attacks might be coming out fairly fast in your rotation, just because they want you to hit it, have an activate, and then go again. So we'll see. It is possible that the bonus amount of hits gained from Imminent Demise do not count with Frenetic Flurry, because it could flip and mess up your global cooldown rotation. But I'm hoping that they do work together and that your global is still not affected by having a Blade Storm proc, right? The damage here just straight up got doubled. Overpower 10%, Bloodthirst 10%. It is now just flat double to 20%. A lot of things in Slayer got buffed by double, including its capstone. The original capstone here reads that reduce the cooldown of Blade Storm by 5 seconds per stack of marked for execution and apply stacks of Overwhelmed equal to the number of stacks of marked to execution that the target had. It's a mouthful of words that it didn't need to be. But your Overwhelmed stacks are this: your damage taken increased by up to 10% for 20 seconds. So that means every time you're consuming stacks of marked for execution, the new tooltip says you reduce the cooldown of Blade Storm by 5 seconds and apply 2 stacks of Overwhelm to the target per stack of marks of execution consumed. So if you're consuming 3 stacks of marked for execution through any means, you are now getting 2 stacks instead of 1 stack. The 2 stacks might matter early on where you're just restacking it. Hopefully through gameplay, if you're able to keep a high amount of uptime, your overwhelming blades is just simply not going to fall off through procs of mark for execution stacks, through executing using those stacks, and through Bladestorm procs of Bloodthirst. Sorry, my words are being slurred. But this seems to play a little better and flow better. They also see, like I said, received a significant amount of buffs to it. These necessarily aren't really buffs to Tunnel Vision and Thrill Kill change, just because we just didn't have those numbers in the first place. But once again, like I said, the alpha coming soon might be a reality as it leads credence to these being updated. And it's not even just my class. Other classes had theirs updated as well. If you haven't, I recommend taking a look at them because your class may have received buffs or changes here that would make them better. But once again, thank you to Mr. Zan for sending me these changes and letting me spout these out before the alpha coming out and people start making a whole bunch of videos and that kind of thing. So yeah, undocumented changes, cool. Buffs are great. We'll see how it is, and hopefully within the alpha, we'll get to see what our talent tree looks like, because that's the real big change. And I will talk to you then. Bye-bye.